It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson, the explainer-in-chief, is here. Our topic of the day, your questions, Steve's answers. There's a little bit of security news, too. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 449, recorded April 1st, 2014. Your questions, Steve's answers, number 185. Security Now is brought to you by Proxpn. Proxpn is a virtual private network that allows you to use the internet the way it ought to be, anonymously and without oversight. For 20% off your new account, go to proxpn.com/twit and use the code SN20. And by Sharefile. Enhance your workflow. Send files of almost any size easily and securely with Sharefile from Citrix. Try Sharefile today. For a 30-day free trial, go to sharefile.com, click the microphone, and enter Security Now. It's time for Security Now, the show that covers your security and privacy. And with this guy here, the explainer-in-chief, Mr. Stephen Tiberius Gibson. Hello, Steve. Good to see you.
Move my hand more slowly. It sort of blurs when I do that.
The Skype doesn't handle fast motion too well. We want to say we are recording this on April 1st. It is April Fool's Day. There will be no April Fool's jokes in this show at all.
Not from here. And that's not we're not trying to set you up for one by telling you there won't be any. There actually won't be any. So, and I was thinking, well, if had I planned ahead, April 1st, how often does that happen? Please don't answer that question. I'm sure we have people who
we know the answer, Steve. But you have a show on April 1st probably doesn't happen but once every, say, 7 years.
Yeah, there are. We have a neat podcast. It was a surprisingly quiet week from a security standpoint, which is perfect for a Q&A because normally traditionally the Q&As have run long. But we do have some additional news from a research project that the world's cryptographers did just to see how bad that NSA, RSA collusion actually was. And it turns out it's far worse than we knew.
Oh, no.
Then the question arose in a sort of an unfortunate Computer World column about whether Google's always HTTPS for Gmail was a bad thing or not. An interesting tip for installing impossible to enter by hand Wi-Fi passwords in visitors' iPhones. The predicted collapse in cloud storage pricing. An odd question, sort of an up-in-the-air question about advertising for Firefox, a bunch of miscellaneous stuff, and we have 11 listener and follower questions. I mentioned follower because I got about half of them from, over the course of the week, people tweeting things. I thought, well, that's a great question for the next podcast. So just overall, some interesting news, more potpourri and miscellanea than security, but it's because not much really happened this week. So
good.
We certainly had 3 weeks of talking about iOS security. And
that next week it'll be the last day for XP. So
it's funny too because I'm sitting here looking at my end of support Windows 7, whatever you call it, applet
Do
thing.
You have a ticker?
And I remember when it was in 3 digits. I remember when it was like 385, and I was thinking, or even higher. And it was like, it's never going to happen. And now it says 06.
Ooh.
So, yeah, it's interesting that it has a leading 0. I don't know why, but anyway. So next week will be that.
All right. Good. Well, this is going to be a fun show. I've got the questions in front of me. I've got your show notes. We've got a lot to talk about, so we'll get right to it. And once again, don't worry. You don't have to and I think on a show like this, the idea of having to parse through everything we say to see if it's made up is not a good thing on a security show. You don't – this is not the place for April Fool's jokes.
I completely agree. Yeah. And it's just people
it's not that we don't have a sense of humor, but just –
well – actually, we got so much feedback from last week's fun.
Oh, yeah.
With the cash spewing ATM.
Yeah. A number of people said they spit out their lunch.
Yes, I heard that also. Yeah, I mean that like do not drink coffee while listening to the Security Now podcast when we're on a roll.
Yeah.
And so we took care of all the levity last week, and people ought to know me by now. It's just really sort of not my. I'm too serious. I mean, I believe things.
Well, and the
I'm
topic
cautious.
is serious. We don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking security, you don't want any ambiguity or confusion in the content. It should be clear that we're talking.
So we're not doing that.
Yeah, we're serious about that. This is not a setup or anything. God, I hate April Fool's Day. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our show today brought to you by our friends at Proxpn. If you're going online, there is danger lurking around every corner. Well, at least the risk that your privacy will be compromised if you're on an open Wi-Fi access spot. But frankly, even if you're at home, now we know internet service providers are watching what you do. They've got that 6 strikes rule. They're trying to see if you're doing anything they deem illegal and block it. If you want to watch or view content in other countries, a lot of times geographic restrictions will prevent that. Well, Proxpn is a great way around all of that. It is an open VPN solution that's hosted not just in the U.S., but all over the world, Singapore, London, Amsterdam. So when you surf using Proxpn, you can appear in those cities. Proxpn is 100% secure, too. We know that OpenVPN really works. The encryption key is 2048 bits. The encryption tunnel is 512 bits. This is OpenVPN. It's strong encryption. It protects you online. It protects your privacy online, and that's the way the internet was meant. They even have mobile apps, which I love. They're iOS and Android apps. The Android app actually adds VPN to Android, which it doesn't normally have, so you don't have to use PPTP, although you can. Proxpn supports that as well. It's just not quite as solid as OpenVPN. We want you to try it. We love it. I use it myself. I encourage others to do so. Every time you surf, protect your privacy online with Proxpn. If you're on a desktop or a laptop, Proxpn has Windows and Mac software, too, that gives you advanced controls. You can select ports. You can connect at startup. You can even select which programs should be shut down if for some reason your anonymity has been compromised. That's really nice. I want you to try it. Here's the deal. You can try the free version. The premium version is faster and better in a lot of ways. Take a look at proxpn.com/twit and you can see the differences. We got it set up so that really you might as well just try the premium version. First of all, normally $10 a month or $75 a year. We have an offer code SN20 that cuts 20% off of that. And not just for the first month or year, but forever. That means less than $5 a month when you buy the yearly plan. That's very, very affordable protection. And we've also arranged a cancellation, 7-day cancellation for a full refund, so you don't have to, you can try it and then say, yeah, this is not for me, and cancel, and you'll get all your money back. I don't think you will. It really is the best VPN I've tried. OpenVPN through proxpn.com/twit and use the offer code SN20, and you'll get 20% off for the life of your account. Steve Gibson, Leo Laporte, there must be some security news this week.
Oh, unfortunately there is. Yeah. So some of the things that we discuss that we consider to be vulnerabilities are sort of annoyingly theoretical. You know, they're like the ivory tower academics have determined that when the moon is in a certain phase and this sea seems unusually quiet, if you inject a packet into a certain port at that time, maybe something can happen. I mean, some of these things just seem really obscure. And one of the most controversial recent issues has been this so-called dual EC DRBG. That's the dual EC as an elliptic curve. DRBG is deterministic random bit generator. This was that random number generator which for some reason became the default choice in RSA's BSafe library suite, which covers all kinds of different languages. And it was an article in Reuters that then alleged that RSA had received $10 million in a deal whose terms we still don't know, but that was from the NSA, and Reuters alleged that it was in order for RSA to make this random number generator the default. Now, that was when there were 4 choices. This was the 4th one and was orders of magnitude slower than the others. And even at the time, security researchers were raising red flags because there were just too many unknowns associated with it. It was like, well, okay, why do we need an elliptic curve-based pseudo-random number generator? We've already got 3 good ones based on solid, proven architectures.
Yeah, especially if it's slower, it's suspect, it's worse. Why would anyone pick it?
Well, and more than that, I mean, it's one thing to say we'd like you to make it an option, but the way the BSafe library works is you can request any of them, but if you make no request, then you get the default. Oh. And I've often spoken of the so-called my term, the tyranny of the default, and that is that what's set as the default is what's most often used. I mean, for example, XP had a firewall in it from the first day. It wasn't until Service Pack 2 turned it on by default that we got any protection, because even though it was there and everybody was telling people to turn it on, nobody did. So again, default settings might as well be the only settings available for all intents and purposes. A group, and I can't even enumerate their names. They're if you follow that link, dualec.org, Leo, here in the show notes, that'll take you to a page where on the left-hand side it lists the cryptographers that were involved. And this is a who's who of the academic, serious, hardcore crypto community. I mean, among them, we've got Dan Bernstein and Matt, and people who we're often talking about. What these guys did was they said, okay, let's quantify the risk which the presence of the dual EC DRBG actually represents. So to do that, because the code that contained this was not open source, they had to reverse engineer and disassemble the RSA BSafe package, Microsoft's S channel, which is the secure channel library in Windows. And fortunately, OpenSSL is open and open source, so that one they didn't have to reverse engineer. What they did was they said, let's assume that the NSA does know something about the elliptic curve that was chosen for this. In order to find out what that means, let's replace the elliptic curve that they may know about with an elliptic curve that we do know about. So the point is that it's very trivial for the cryptographers to choose specific elliptic curves that have weaknesses that they know about. Very much the way the NSA may well have chosen this particular elliptic curve that we got from them. And so what these guys did is they reverse engineered the BSafe package to find the elliptic curve spec inside and changed it to one whose weaknesses they understood in the same way that the NSA may understand the weaknesses of this particular one. Then they did that for the RSA BSafe package, Microsoft's security suite in Windows, so-called S channel, and OpenSSL. So in their paper, they said major findings are as follows. The RSA BSafe implementation of TLS make the dual EC backdoor particularly easy to exploit. compared to the other libraries analyzed. The C version of BSafe makes a drastic speed up in the attack possible by broadcasting long, contiguous strings of random bytes and by caching the output from each generator call. The Java version of BSafe includes fingerprints in connections, making it relatively easy to identify them in a stream of network traffic. S-Channel, that's Microsoft Security Suite, does not implement the current dual EC standard. It omits one step of the dual EC algorithm. This omission does not prevent attacks. In fact, it makes them slightly faster. And then finally, they said a previously unknown bug was discovered in OpenSSL that prevented the library from running when dual EC was enabled. So it wasn't even functional, actually. It was like installed, but apparently no one ever tried to use it. They said it is still conceivable that someone is using dual EC in OpenSSL, although frankly, this is me saying I think that's probably unlikely, since the bug has an obvious and very easy fix, which was applied in order to evaluate the resulting version of OpenSSL, which the paper calls OpenSSL-fixed. OpenSSL fixed turns out to provide additional entropy with each call to the library. In practice, this additional input can make attacks significantly more expensive than for the other libraries. So that was a good thing. But they found something else that was, again, sort of chilling. They said evidence was discovered of an implementation of a non-standard TLS extension called extended random in RSA's BSafe products. This extension, so this is an extension to the TLS protocol. This extension, co-written at the request of the National Security Agency, allows a client to request longer TLS random nonces from the server, a feature which, if enabled, would speed up the dual EC attack by a factor of up to 65,000. And I thought, okay, wait a minute, extended random, what's that? So I tracked it down. There is online an IETF draft, and sure enough, it is co-authored. One of the authors is National Security Agency, the NSA, and under the rationale, they explain the United States Department of Defense has requested a TLS mode which allows the use of longer public randomness values for use with high security level cipher suites like those specified in Suite B. The rationale for this, as stated by DoD, is that the public randomness for each side should be at least twice as long as the security level for cryptographic parity, which makes the 224 bits of randomness provided by the current TLS random values insufficient. This document specifies an extension which allows for additional randomness to be exchanged in hello messages. So to unwrap that a little bit, remember that when we've covered the way SSL TLS protocol operates, that each side generates its own random nonce and provides it to the other, and they use that for their ephemeral key agreement technology for building a shared key such that nobody who's eavesdropping, who doesn't change the data, that isn't an active man in the middle, is able to get in the way and to figure out the secret that they then are able to share. So it completely makes sense that I mean, like this statement about why this so-called extra or extended random would be useful is incontrovertible. At the same time, when you and I guess the NSA would be the means through which this is done, but what they realized was by having RSA support this a client was able to ask for more randomness from the server and thus obtain much more state information. And as they actually demonstrated, by pulling this off, they were able to get a dramatic acceleration in cracking. And this paper, which and I saw you had it on the screen there a second ago, Leo, at dualec.org. Anyone who's interested can read the summary. I found the PDF, and then I couldn't find a link to it again. But it shows the time in minutes required to crack the TLS connections.
It's kind of stunning.
It's frightening. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's horrifying.
Well, the only one that's any good is the fixed open SSL.
Correct.
Yeah.
And as they noted, the fact that additional entropy is added, and the programmers of the SSL of the Open SSL library must have done that, because they thought,
just in case.
We're not so sure where that came from. But what did it do? It the worst one looks like it was as I mentioned, the C library of BSafe.
I don't even know how much time 0.04 minutes is, but it's not a lot.
No, 0.04 of a minute.
It's less than a second.
Less than a second. No, wait, 0.04 of a minute. It's not less than a second.
Yes,
but not much more.
No, there's 60 seconds in a minute. It's. Oh yeah, okay. 4/100 is 1/25 of a minute. Yeah, so it's a couple of seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple seconds. Bang. Thank you very much.
Boom.
Yeah. And
now the best though is what 2 to the 2 to the 83. I can't even read that number.
Right.
Big number.
Big number. So it doesn't really affect OpenSSL because it's broken in OpenSSL and it's not turned on by default. And if you turn it on, it breaks it. So anyone who thinks maybe it would be a good idea probably just turns it off and goes back to what everybody else is using. Also, BSafe, they believed they were able to fingerprint servers that were using BSafe, and looking across the entire net at servers offering SSL, it wasn't effectively present. But the danger is people using BSafe in their own security suites or in their own like VPNs or link packages or things. I mean, the idea is this is a crypto library that you use for building into proprietary crypto systems, which is precisely what the NSA would like to have access to, and what they, even if they had compromised a certificate authority or were running some sort of HTTPS proxy, that wouldn't be able to intercept proprietary crypto. And so, the RSA was where you purchased, historically, I'm not sure that's the case any longer, where you purchased your crypto libraries to build proprietary solutions. And if this dual EC DRBG was the default random number generator, and somebody was bringing up like a proprietary link between corporate infrastructures, for example, you'd use TLS. In which case, wham, given that it is true that the NSA knows something about the particular elliptic curve that they provided to NIST in order to assemble this, and it's now seeming, suspiciously like they do. And again, there's no reason to believe that this extended random is a deliberate additional hook, but oh my Lord, you couldn't design something better to give you this leverage than to say, oh, let's put this into BSafe because it's an extension to TLS and we want to be fully compliant, even though it's not a standard. It hasn't even been adopted yet. But it's a way of telling the client, the client telling the server, tell me more about your random numbers. And as these guys again demonstrated by actually doing it, it provides basically a 16-bit shortening of security. That's where that 65,000 comes from. It's 65536 times easier to crack this. So You know, Leo, I hate this. I mean, the reason I mess with computers and I code is that they obey rules and you know what's going on and you have a deterministic world. And so suddenly now we've, this aspect of computing that is so important has been just thrown into a huge gray area where we just have to say, well, we don't know. I mean, maybe, but we don't know what's going on.
That's sad.
It's disturbing.
Yeah.
So there was a weird Computer World article, and it's called the Reality Check column. And unfortunately, I think that Robert Mitchell, who writes it, needs maybe his own reality check. Maybe he was at deadline. I can't explain this, but he argues that he actually does argue in this column that Google turning Gmail on forcefully for everybody is bad. That
what?
Yes, that's what he says.
Oh,
you will use HTTPS. And so he argues that user choice is being removed.
Yeah, the choice to be less secure is being removed.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. And that response time is hindered.
That's
and the
not
fact
true.
is, it's not true.
Yeah.
No. First of all, nobody is spending more time minimizing response time than Google with, the proprietary protocols they're moving on, speedy and quick and all the things they're doing. And we already know that the only time you get a hit from using SSL, HTTPS, TLS, is during the initial handshake, and that from that point on, successive connections have no detectable overhead. And there's now with computers as powerful as they are, even that handshake, especially as we're moving away from RSA to good elliptic curve algorithms, that's been reduced by an order of magnitude. So it's just like, what? And so it's funny because when I went back after several people tweeted me the column saying, Steve, you were thinking this was a good thing. What do you think? And I read it and I thought, okay, well, anyway, I went back and apparently I'm not the only person to think that Robert was a little bit off the mark with this, because he did comment that he'd received a lot of similar feedback and quoted one person who just basically said, no, it is a good thing for everybody to have this turned on. He was, more than by default, it's just got to be. And it's easy to understand what a benefit this is if it's only marketing for everyone since last week when this happened, to know that Google, if you're using Gmail, you have HTTPS. End of story. I mean, that's comforting that there isn't any way to, that Google will accept a non-HTTPS connection from your browser at no point in any scenario. So, yeah. And that's not.
But I don't have the choice.
I know.
I want the choice of what? I don't know really. But
I got a tweet just yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to dig deep into this, and I've provided links in the show notes, so anyone who's interested can. Carl Cornell, who tweets as @California Carl, Karl, he sent me. He first sent me his own document that he was shared with me, or he created a public link in Dropbox, which it's essentially an XML script for Apple iPhones, which he designed to allow visitors to instantly configure their iPhone for his Wi-Fi network that has a Security Now style password, meaning one he may have gotten from grc.com/passwords, that it's virtually impossible to enter it into any piece of equipment. The only way you're ever able to do so is by copy and paste. And the problem is when visitors come over, they want to be on his network, use his Wi-Fi. So it turns out that Apple has in support of corporate use of iPhones, a very comprehensive configuration utility which produces these, I don't know if you call them manifests, but they're like the configuration XML files that allow all kinds of really deep, cool configuration where you can like instantly apply email accounts. You can restrict the application. You can, lock applications. You can provision Wi-Fi passwords and so forth. So I just thought, hey, this is the kind of thing that's absolutely going to appeal to some percentage of our listeners, and I wanted to pass that on because it's just there's utilities for Windows and Mac, which Mac OS 10 that'll allow you to step through this and set these things and then produce these outputs, which you then allow an iPhone or iPad to digest and to lock it down or pre-configure it in various cool ways. So links in the show notes to that. They're nothing that that I could ever repeat. And I've promised that I'm going to update everybody on the current state of Trust No One cloud storage. The podcast we did years ago where I ran through all of the ones that were either current or coming, like they may have been in beta, was super popular. And naturally, there's been a huge amount of change since then. For example, Jungle Disk has gone through some changes, and the world has changed. So I've already been taking notes of all of the services that I intend to review, and I'm getting people who have been tweeting since. But I noted that, as expected, Amazon immediately followed Google's huge reduction in cloud storage pricing. And not to be outdone, and actually because Microsoft explicitly said they would, Microsoft has also followed suit, followed Amazon right down, in some cases matching or even undercutting Amazon's pricing. So, and as we talked about, remember last week we looked at the price of, I think it was a 3 terabyte drive, at what that cost per gig, and what the service providers were charging, and we saw that even at these, Google's new super low pricing, they paid for the storage in like 3 or 4 months. So, it absolutely makes sense that pricing was ultimately going to, come down to this level, and it's because of that. Because cloud storage is now, it makes so much sense. That we really do need to come back and look at the range of solutions that are available. Then I picked up a sort of a distressing story about, and I guess it's a couple months old, Leo. You may have already seen this or run across this notion that Mozilla will be adding advertising to Firefox.
No, that's news to me.
Okay,
I don't use Firefox, so I don't really pay that much attention to it, I guess.
Right. Maybe you can explain something. Why is it that Google is Firefox's major benefactor to the tune of $300 million a year?
See, that's the interesting thing about Firefox. It's actually quite profitable because of the Google search box. And it's not just Firefox. Safari also benefits. Any browser that uses the Google search box gets the benefit of Google ads, So it's actually been very good for the Mozilla project.
So it's good for Google too. So
absolutely, it's a very nice win-win.
Okay, yeah. So here's the deal.
Now you don't have. By the way, if you're a user and you say, "Well, I don't want Google," you can change the default search to anything else, and then Mozilla will get no money from that.
the tyranny of the default.
Right.
How many people are going to do that? Mozilla has talked about advertising in the past, and naturally there's been a huge uproar from users who are really worried about what that means. So Mozilla is approaching this again, and Mitchell Baker, who's the chair of the Mozilla Foundation, defends Firefox's new ad program and explained a few things. Okay, so what we know is that what they're wanting to do is to put tiles on the new tab page. So when you say I open a new tab, and I do that all the time, I think I get just Google. I think I maybe get a tab. In fact, I've got it right here. Let me see what I click on. Open new tab. No, it's a blank page. So it's waiting for something to happen. Completely blank. What they're wanting to do is to put something there.
Well, that's not so bad.
I have no problem with that.
If it's not on the page as I use it,
correct.
That's not so bad.
So the idea is when you create a new tab, there will be something there.
Yeah.
Rather than what right now is just a blank page.
Now, I should point out the reason they're considering this is because their deal with Google is about to run out at the end of the year. And they're concerned that Google won't re-up. And that would be a very significant blow to the Mozilla. I mean, you lose $300 million a year. I can see why they'd be worried.
Yes, and that's exactly right. In December of 2014, that deal is over. And, and so I look at this as, okay, do I mind 9 large tiles? And they're saying 2 of which might be sponsored. In general, they're wanting to give people links to things they really believe would be useful. But they're saying, yes, and we'd like to survive. And from my standpoint, my Lord, if it's a matter of losing Firefox or putting up with some tiles on the new tab before I put in the URL that I want to go to, thank you very much. I'm happy that you can make the tiles smaller and give me more of them if you want. And no tracking. They are blocking any tracking so that if you click on that, what the redirect that occurs has all tracking information explicitly stripped from it, and you are not tracked. So I believe this makes sense as a compromise. And so if at some point, my new tab, when I update to version 33, I think we're at 28 now, and it shows me some tiles, hey, fine. If it's that or losing Firefox, I'm happy to do that.
I wouldn't be surprised if they add a switch that can disable that anyway.
I agree with you.
It seems like something it is an open source project still. And I should point out, Chrome in effect has an ad for Google. When you create a new tab, you do get, 8 smaller thumbnails of your most visited pages, but right front and center is a big Google search box and, a link to Gmail, and that's in effect an ad for Google, right?
Yeah. Okay, so this I'm wrapping up with just a crazy posting, but there's a message here. This was someone tweeted it. It's thevarguy.com's blog, and he said the title of this entry was "Why Windows XP's Demise is Bad for Linux and Open Source." And I thought, what? Anyway, so basically, he's explaining that he runs Windows XP in a VirtualBox VM under Linux, and he uses it to edit large book manuscripts which cause LibreOffice to collapse, but Microsoft Office doesn't. So he runs Microsoft Office in Windows XP to edit large book manuscripts and to play something called Age of Kings. So then he says that WinXP is so much leaner than Vista or Windows 7 or Windows 8 that moving up will be impossible. And so this is a perfect example of the point I'm going to continue to try to make as I explain what it means to have the constant patch drip cut off next week to Windows XP. And here's a perfect example. The guy launches XP to run Office to edit a book manuscript. So, there's no vulnerability introduced there. None. Or to play some XP hosted video game, which he is enamored with. Again, it's like, okay, that's not a problem. So all I'm trying to say to people is relative to this, end of the XP patch drip, is use your heads. Think about what this means rather than assuming that it's the end of the world. My contention, and as I have said, we're going to have an interesting period of a few years starting next week to see if I'm crazy or if I knew what I was talking about, that this is a tempest in a teapot, that it's a good operating system, and that everything that it uses to connect to the world is still being patched, and that those are the things that represent the lion's share of the vulnerabilities in the operating system. We'll see. We don't know what vulnerabilities may have been held back as this is approaching. Anyway, I could be wrong. We'll find out.
It's coming. I suspect we'll talk about it next week.
Oh, yeah. So, Neil Young's Pono.
Oh, yes. I invested.
I'm wondering, I wanted to alert our listeners only as a public service because the thing has just gone ballistic.
Oh, yeah.
This is Neil Young's ultra-high resolution music player, which he is a Kickstarter project. So people can, put, it's Pono, or put Neil Young Pono into Google. I'm sure you'll go there.
Oh, yeah. Just Pono Kickstarter will get you to the Pono.
So they wanted to raise...
It's Hawaiian for righteous.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
They wanted to raise $800,000 in order to create this. They're now at $5,237,804 at this point, with 13 days to go. So you have 2 weeks. Check it out if you're interested. What it is it's attempting to be, as the name sounds, an ultra-high resolution music player, meaning that rather than sampling at 44.1 or 48 kilohertz, they sample at 192 kilohertz, and rather than digitizing at 16 bits, they digitize at 24. I was interested in the technology, so immediately dug into the digital to analog converter chip that they're using, which is actually it's a 32-bit D to A, and my Lord, I mean, it's a good insane.
DAC. This company apparently is a very good company that's doing the DAC.
Yeah.
It doesn't do any sampling on its own. We should make this clear. It's a player. The point is It can play back FLAC files, which is a lossless, open source lossless compression format, in as high as 192 kilohertz 24-bit. And the reason Young thinks this is even viable is that many albums are now recorded at high resolutions like that. Of course, when you sample it onto a CD, you make it much smaller. Its CD's quality is 44:1 by 16.
Right.
And even though it's not compressed. So this is not about compression. This is about sampling rates.
Right.
I bought it just because it's $400. Actually, they have one, but they sold out for $300. And if it, I want to hear it. If it sounds that good, there are those who poo-poo it. I thought you were going to poo-poo it.
I have a link there to a great technical article
I read that,
that argues that whereas 24 bits of sampling size may be useful, the article argues strongly and technically that, and acoustically, that the 192 kilohertz sampling is not beneficial and in fact may be detrimental. So I didn't go through it in detail, but I just wanted to give our listeners a heads up because, wow, if it's that popular, you know, we ought to know about it.
This article is by the guy Monty, who created the Ogg Vorbis compression format.
So he knows a little something about
acoustics. He knows
acoustics.
a lot about acoustics. On the other hand, I don't know if he would argue this. There's no question that the compression, including Ogg Vorbis, which is not a particularly, in my opinion, good compression technology, takes a lot of the oomph out of music.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's my opinion that a higher sample rate, you know, this goes to that golden ears thing, because people say analog is better than digital, and
also the idea that you're wearing earbuds in traffic. It's
well,
like,
that's not what this is for. I got to tell you, this is not about wearing earbuds in traffic. They don't even sell headphones because they say you need to have very, very good headphones, and it also has two connections. One that's appropriate for your stereo, so you can play your Pono into your Sonos, which is what I plan to do. Then I'll have a Pono Sono. And that can't be a bad thing.
And I did want to note that the Typo keyboard is threatened by a judge having granted an injunction, which BlackBerry brought. I'm not surprised because the design is a direct ripoff of the BlackBerry keyboard. I mean, anyone who's used a BlackBerry and looks at the Typo keyboard says, "Oh, I mean, you know, it is." And I had never really looked into design patents. I knew that there was a term because all of my patents have been, you know, invention patents. You know, they're software or hardware or something. But it said, two lines from Wikipedia about this said, in the United States, a design patent is a form of legal protection granted to the ornamental design of a functional item. Design patents are a type of industrial design right. And the second line is, a U.S. design patent covers the ornamental design for an object having practical utility. An object with a design that is substantially similar to the design claimed in a design patent cannot be made, used, copied, or imported into the United States. The copy does not have to be exact for the patent to be infringed. It only has to be substantially similar.
Well, it is.
Which is, oh boy, baby. So
that's why you like it.
Exactly. And in fact, I gave one to Mark, my friend, and one to a Starbucks friend of mine. Both are ex-BlackBerry users. Neither can live without it now.
Wow.
And I feel the same way. I mean, it is so much better than typing on the touchscreen. It's funny because I can tell Mark uses his iPhone on his bike, for like sports instrumentation, and so he's moving it in and out of the case. And sometimes he tries to send me a text when he's not using the Typo keyboard, and I always know because there's typos. So anyway, I think it's probably gone. I think any judge or jury looking at this Typo keyboard and assuming that BlackBerry has design patents, as they must in order to have brought the suit, and for a judge to have granted a preliminary injunction barring the further sale of the Typo, and understand that's a very high bar to meet. No judge does that cavalierly because the judge would only do this if he or she was absolutely, virtually certain that the final judgment would be the same, because they are clearly risking dramatically damaging the company against which this injunction is granted. In this case, the Typo keyboard company. So I don't know if they'll change the design to be non-infringing. Apparently, I got this from your discussion of this on Twit on Sunday, Leo, yours and John's, or somebody else brought it up. I think that someone did anyway, but I think it was news to John, so it wasn't he, that they had originally approached BlackBerry and asked for licensing rights.
There was their mistake. They kind of raised some attention there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks just like the BlackBerry keyboard. That's true.
It is. Yeah. It's not as good as the BlackBerry. It doesn't have the width to be as good, and the construction quality is not as great. You saw that the BlackBerry's bringing back the bold, by the way. It's because
really, they're desperate is why, I'll tell you.
Yeah, they're rolling back and going to a previous phone that they're now saying economies of manufacture allow them to make profitably, which apparently they weren't before, and it's outselling the newer junk that they have. So it's like, okay, yeah. I mean, I'm part of the iPhone iOS ecosystem now. There's no way I can go back. I've got iMessage groups of people who all have iOS devices. I love the fact that all of my pads and phone are synchronized, and I wish there was a gateway from my PC. That's annoying. Because oftentimes I'm wanting to send, share a bookmark over through iCloud to an iPad so that I'll pick it up when I'm next out. But yeah, I can't go back, much as I like the keyboard. So yes, Leo, I am glad that I have a few spares in the refrigerator.
Oh, you heard me. I was. I'm embarrassed now. I mentioned that a little bit. I was not mocking you. Well, I was maybe a little on Twitter this Sunday.
How I have,
because it's not untrue.
I have HP calculators everywhere I turn. There are HP calculators.
What?
Because I've got them in drawers.
And of course, you must have loved Dvorak's response.
Here's two more in cases.
I wasn't making this up, folks.
This is the best calculator that was ever created, and I don't ever want to risk being without it. So I have them all over the place.
But I stand corrected; they're not in your freezer.
It's pretty cold here. No,
do you still have you used to have Palm 7s or something in your?
The Palm Tungsten, I think it was. No, it was the one that's anyway. I was in love with that. I read a whole bunch of ebooks on that, and I thought, I never want to be without this. Well, some of these investments don't turn out the way I expect. Some of them do.
We love you for it.
I'm very happy that I have all the HP calculators that are
and
available.
the Typo keyboard, because you can't.
And the Typo keyboard. I have although here's the problem: iPhone 6 is expected to be substantially larger.
Yeah, you have to get.
And so much for the Typo keyboard.
Well, they haven't gone to trial yet. That was just a preliminary injunction. That doesn't mean that they won't be back.
Does not look good, my friend.
Doesn't look good. Yeah.
No.
By the way, Dvorak's response to that was priceless, and I think you did see it.
The timing, the delivery, it was perfect.
Just like flat, and then Gibson's nuts, which we made the title of the show in your honor, I must say.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So. Speaking of nuts, let's talk about Squirrel briefly.
Yes.
We're now heading toward 52 languages. We're at 51, and I was just asked to add Indonesian to the lineup. So the person, I sent a message back to the person who asked me for Indonesian. So that takes us to 52. The user interface is coming to life. And just so that people understand that, what you'd expect from me, in looking at the translations that we have so far, I see that the Asian logographic font, or glyphs, they tend to be extremely dense, but they would do better with larger font area, with a larger font size. But so they would like to have more height, but they don't consume nearly as much length because they're so expressive in the individual glyphs. So the technology that I have, I've what I've been doing is as you know from last week, I talked about the binary search and the support for languages and how the Squirrel client will be able to very quickly extract whatever strings it needs in the language that it's set to use in order to use them. So what I've done is, in order to properly render this wide array of languages, I have several stages that the application goes through after startup before it even appears on the screen, and it's pretty instantaneous. I don't think anyone will notice that anything has happened, and that is, it takes in the user interface, and all of the UI panels are there at grc.com. This is the most interface heavy app I've ever written. You know, most of mine are like a single panel that it has a couple buttons on it and it tells you what you want to know, or the DNS benchmark. I use the rich text format control to create some scrollable dialogue, but Squirrel leaves all of those behind. There's a ton of UI because I want to, take people in baby steps through it. I wanted to make it easy to use and also have it explain itself as it goes. So I start off by taking one of the longer strings which fits within a rectangle in the UI and render in the target language that string into the rectangle. And Windows, of course, handles line wrap. So that'll tell me how large in the target rectangle that language's equivalent is. And so the first thing I do is increase the height of the font pixel by pixel until that reference string no longer fits in the rectangle. Then I back it back by 1 pixel. So what that has the effect of doing is it allows a font which is more expressive because it contains more content in a smaller area. It gives it credit for the fact that it doesn't end up being as long by allowing it to be higher and still fit within the allotted space. So that sets the height for the font. Then the client rifles through every single string which is wrapped like that is, body copy text, to verify that they all fit within the target area that they're allotted. And if any one doesn't, then the entire dialogue expands by 20 pixels. And then we test it again. 20 pixels, test it again. 20 pixels, test it again. So until that particular one does fit. And then I continue. I don't go back and start. I just keep going because, of course, all the other ones up to then fit in the regular size. So once we're through with that pass, what we have is we have a font which is as large as it can be, assuming the default dialogue. And if we're looking at a language which is substantially longer than English, and there are a number of them, then the user interface has been stretched horizontally such that all of the strings in that language fit within the designated space. And once that's done, that is all about the sort of the body copy text, the UI also has a headline and a subhead on many of the dialog pages. And so after the width has been set, then I go back and find the largest font size where all the headlines can fit within the headline size and all the subheads can fit within the subhead size. That we lock it all down, and then the first dialogue appears. So it's handling multiple languages the way you'd expect me to handle them, which is I think it will right out of the gate work well and be viewable for everyone. And I forgot to mention that before doing any of that, I also scale to the font size which the user has set on their system. You know how Windows, you can have it set to like large fonts if you want everything to be larger. So I first scale everything up to that, then go through all this. So it also honors the user's individual local font size settings. So, and it's working, by the way. What I just described yesterday came to life. So because I have so much UI, I wanted to do justice to handling multilingual stuff correctly. I built a user interface engine essentially that allows me to create a description of the individual UI panels, which it then renders, taking the specific language that it's rendering into account. And it's looking good. And I did get, I got a nice note from some guy named Andreas in Sweden on the 18th of March. He sent it. He said, "Hi, Steve," and he says, "And Leo," just to include you, Leo.
Yes.
He says, "I like to thank you for SpinRite. A while back, my MacBook Pro would not boot up. The funny thing is that I rarely shut down my computer at the end of the day. I usually just put it to sleep. But on this occasion, I did shut it down. As I did, it hit me that my last backup was a couple of days ago, and I had some files which had not been backed up. But I brushed it off, thinking I could back up these files once I start my computer the next day. And what could go wrong? It will not be any problem. Boy, was I wrong. When I came back and tried to start my computer, it would not boot into OS X. How hard I tried with recovery disks and other tools, but nothing would help. I was able to boot into my Windows partition, so I knew that something was wrong with my OS X partition. In Windows, I was able to purchase and download SpinRite immediately from you, though sitting on the edge of my seat, hoping my Windows partition would not crash as well. With some tinkering, I got SpinRite going. Once it had finished, my Mac would boot up like nothing had happened, working faster and smoother than before. I was able to back up all my files, and just to be safe, I bought and installed a new SSD. So big thanks for saving my files. Best regards, Andreas.
Yay.
And thank you, Andreas, for sharing the story. And for what it's worth, the copy of SpinRite you own will keep your SSD running well, too. Just run it on level 2 from now on.
Yeah. That was a great tip you gave us. And since so many people are moving to SSD, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
We're going to come back. I've got questions for you. You've got answers via the Twitterverse. But first, a word from Sharefile.com from Citrix. Speaking of HTTPS, the secure way to share files, all the file transfers are done over secure SSL HTTPS connection. That's something you can say for some email, but not all email. In fact, email is inherently, I think, insecure unless you are encrypting it because it goes over the public internet. There are other issues, too. And nowadays in business, we're sending a lot of email attachments, and I think that's really the wrong thing to do. Email, besides being insecure, you could get bounce backs because we're sending these big files, and most email systems don't like that. And we're always telling everybody, don't open attachments in email, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're encouraging them to do that. So let's not send attachments. Let's send Sharefile links instead. Sharefile is secure. It's easy. If you're using Outlook, it looks just like you're sending email attachments, but you're not. You're sending a secure link, and you control it. You see who opens it. You control how many times they can download it, for how long. You have permissions. That's something email can't offer you. You can access anything in your Sharefile folders anytime, anywhere, on any device. They have apps for all the smartphones. Sharefile synchronizes folders. So I use Sharefile all the time. I have Sharefile folders, and then I use the Sharefile sync app to synchronize those folders so that they match up on the cloud to the folder on my desktop. Then it's a simple thing for me to send a file. In fact, I can show you if I log into my Sharefile account for those of you who are watching on video. Reason I do this is because I use Sharefile every day to send audio files to the radio stations. You can see, first of all, that it's branded. It has my Twit logo on it. That's one nice thing about Sharefile. And they don't have to sign up for anything. There's no come on even. It just says, here's the link that Leo, here's the file Leo wanted to send you. I frequently send audio files. Let me pick a voice track. Yeah, I did this for WFIR radio. So let's say I want to send this to them. I click the send button. I can make an email on the website, but I can also get a link. And this is what I'm going to show you because I want to show you the various settings. Email me when the item's been downloaded. I can ask recipients to enter name and email before downloading. I have access expirations that range from a day to a year to never. I can say you can have unlimited downloads or 10 or less. All right, now let's send the file. I'm going to get a, you see that HTTPS link, a secure link. And when they click, which I'll then attach to an email, when they click the link in the email, here's what they're going to see. It's very clear, very simple. They see a WAV file. They see my logo. They don't see Sharefile. They don't see a login. They don't see an ad. They see a very simple button that says download. And they know what they're going to get. They know how big it is. It couldn't be clearer. And since I deal with a lot of folks who aren't tech guys, this is a very helpful technology for me. I want you to try Sharefile. If you're in business and you're sending attachments, if you're sending files, this is a very, very good solution, and I've tried them all. I want you to try it free for 30 days. You'll agree. Sharefile.com. Click there. Now, they make this a little hard. But I guess if you didn't have to jump through hoops, it wouldn't be fun. They put the link that I want you to click they kind of hide it away at the very top of the page. So go to sharefile.com, and you'll see, start my free trial, big button. You'll see a menu item, try it free, big button. No, I don't want you to click that. Click that little tiny link there that says podcast listeners, click here. If you would, I know, please click that one. And then when it asks you where you heard it, please enter security now in the entry box. And in fact, another thing you might want to do is select the business that you're in, because they'll customize it for, but it's medical, legal, advertising, whatever you're in, so that it's a SEC regulations or HIPAA or whatever it is that you've got to live up to. Sharefile will do it. Sharefile.com. Please click the link at the top of the homepage and type in security now. All right, I've got questions for Mr. Gibson. Are you ready?
You bet.
All right. Let me pull them up. Question numero uno. Wait a minute, that's not it. Here we go. Les Ramsey in Dublin, Virginia. Didn't even know there was a Dublin, Virginia. He wonders whether government authorities can compel CAs, certificate authorities, to relinquish certificates. This is relevant to that discussion of HTTPS. In fact, one of the things people said, as they're reading that Computer World article, trying to come up with good reasons why HTTPS is a bad idea. That's one of the things people say, well, it could be spoofed. I listen to your podcast every week. It's my primary source of information and education regarding security. While listening to the discussions regarding iOS security, SSL, TLS, and encryption, I wondered if the authorities can compel a certificate authority to divulge customers' certificates. Does that thwart security and leave us with only end-to-end encryption as a last resort to privacy? Thank you for SpinRite. I've been a customer since version 5 was first available. It saved my bacon numerous times.
So I saw this and I thought, this sort of wants me to do a reality check. Because I wonder if we're just not being foolish. Here we are all getting ourselves worked up over issues of protocol and how random are the random numbers, and oh my Lord, this extension in SSL can be used for that and so forth. At the same time, our browsers are trusting hundreds of certificate authorities who we're assuming, and the browser publishers are assuming, are always acting in our best interests. And Les's question, and I've seen it voiced in other ways and contexts, but I wanted to note it because how can we imagine if the NSA has the intent that they've been shown now to have, that they don't have a certificate authority in their pocket, that they're not a certificate authority themselves, who are operating a front as a reliable authority, or that they don't have someone planted inside a certificate authority, or that in fact it's not just as easy as having a judge issue an order to induce a certificate authority to produce a certificate for them. I mean, I guess my point is that, as we know, and we talked about in the iOS context a lot, this notion that the weakest link in the chain is the one that tends to get exploited. And the certificate authority system relies on the trustworthiness of not just one organization, but all the ones that our browser trusts, including famously the Hong Kong post office.
But wait a minute. Wait a minute.
You see what I mean?
Yes,
you see what I mean?
Wait a
it's
minute.
Just
help me with this. So I am the NSA. I want to be you would use this for a man-in-the-middle attack, right? I would like to be in between Leo and Gmail.
correct.
I couldn't do it as the Hong Kong post office. I'd have to get a certificate that said I was Google from the same certificate authority, wouldn't I? Or no?
Well,
and I'd have to convince Leo's browser. I mean, how would you use this as an attack?
Chrome, to Google's credit, Chrome is going a long way to mitigate this because, for example, Chrome cannot have Google certificates spoofed because Chrome knows Google certificates through the process known as certificate pinning, where where the browser itself knows the serial number of the certificate. As far as we know, there is no way for anyone to create an identical fraudulent certificate. They can create a good certificate, but it will not be identical. So Google using Chrome and Google is an instance where, due to the extra measures Google has taken, their links are extra strong. But imagine that you were the NSA and you wanted to intercept your use of Facebook. So all the NSA has to do is induce any one of the, I'm not even sure if it's not thousands. I think it's thousands of certificate authorities who your browser trusts to sign certificates, to issue them a certificate for Facebook.com. So at that point, the NSA has a certificate signed by an authority who your browser trusts, so that when they do a man-in-the-middle attack, that is, when they intercept the connection, they see that you're trying to connect to Facebook.com. So they respond with their certificate, which your browser, even Chrome, because Chrome doesn't have special knowledge about all domains or certificates, only about Google's, where they're pinned. So they respond with a certificate signed by an authority who your browser trusts, one of any of the thousands of authorities your browser trusts, and no alarms are raised. Nothing strange happens. Maybe it's an EV certificate, and you even get an extra green bar in the browser. So that's all it means. It means that while it isn't trivial for mass eavesdropping, it's it's impossible to imagine that the NSA isn't just laughing at us, all worried about this, that the idea that they can't eavesdrop on anyone's connection that they choose to. It strains credibility or credulity that they wouldn't be able to mint any valid certificate that they chose to, given the fact that our browsers are trusting all of the certificate authorities that are issuing valid certificates on the internet.
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about the Hong Kong post office. I'd worry much more about a CA operating in the United States who would have to respond to a national security letter silently and thoroughly. So, I mean,
and be gagged. Yeah, be gagged by it.
So I think it's not unreasonable to assume that the NSA would do that. Now, you're right. It's not good for mass surveillance. You would have to say, hey, I really want to read Steve's email to do it. And in this case, you'd have to get a national security letter. You'd have to go to the ACA. They probably have already got a CA.
They must have a CA in their pocket.
In their pocket, yeah.
Yes, there's one of these thousands that our browser trusts is not actually, I mean, they're in the CA business because they had to prove and look like a CA and act like a CA.
That's easy.
In order to get the, yeah, exactly, it is. Because the browsers don't want to, unfairly deny a little startup CA from having an opportunity to be in business.
For all we know, the Hong Kong post office is actually in Muncie, Indiana, and run by the NSA. I mean, that's for all we,
Actually, no, I know it's not, because we've had a listener who sent us photos, Leo.
Of the Hong Kong post office?
They were standing in front, and he said, Steve, you're not going to believe it. Here I am. I find myself standing in front of the Hong Kong post office.
I probably trust them more than I do.
I wonder if I can go get a certificate.
I don't know if I trust VeriSign. But you can also get very paranoid about all this. I think that this is the risk of this.
Well, yes. And so it's important to note that they could not afford to do it on a wholesale basis, because in fact, the more they did it, the greater chance is that somebody would spot it.
Right.
For example, Google, thanks to Chrome pinning, Chrome's certificate pinning, Google has been the one who spotted when their certs have been spoofed, because Chrome sends an immediate message back to the mothership and says, whoa, someone just connected to me with a bogus Google certificate.
Yeah.
And so Google instantly knows that. So because it would be a completely valid certificate from some domain that they're wanting to intercept the traffic from, but it's not going to be the identical certificate. And that's the whole, my whole certificate fingerprinting service that I put up on GRC last year. That's what that's all about, is the serial numbers cannot be duplicated. So if you're seeing a certificate that doesn't match the one that GRC sees, then there's a reason to worry. But you're right. It's not wholesale, but it's targeted. And we just have to assume that anybody they want to target, they're able to mint certs on the fly, intercept their connections, and decrypt all their communications.
It just means that something we've always known. Don't use the internet for something you want to keep private. But that's always been the case.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a very good point. We have a question a little bit later about Turkey's attempts to block, and you'll hear me saying shortly is that the internet wasn't meant for that. I mean, we are extending it in all kinds of ways beyond what it was meant to do, and it doesn't do very well the things it wasn't meant to do.
When bad guys wanted to talk to one another, they actually met in person. That was usually how they did it. Then they used the phone, and they realized that's not safe. Brian Whedon tweets via Twitter, the White House is looking to replace Obama's BlackBerry with, quote, secure, end quote, Android. But why not iPhone?
I thought that was interesting. This was he links to an article which does show, famously Obama.
I don't think he was using a BlackBerry. I beg to differ. I think he was using a very secured Windows 6.5 phone last time I saw anything. He wanted a BlackBerry.
I thought he always had a BlackBerry.
He'd always had a BlackBerry, and they took it away from him.
He wanted to keep it.
Well, the last I saw, they took it away from him, and they have a secure. Now I'm looking at this, and I think he's still using it based on the photo I'm seeing here in this article. A secure Windows 6.5 phone. They say that's a BlackBerry. Maybe it is, but I think that might be a misapprehension.
I sent 3 tweets back in response to Brian's note just to answer him. I said, first of all, Apple's approach is perfect for the typical consumer who doesn't want the responsibility for security. That is, basically, we've offloaded that to Apple. Apple's going to, curate the iTunes store. They're going to do everything they can to keep bad guys out of their ecosystem and out of our phone. It's not our problem. Perfect for the typical consumer. I said, second tweet, but Android hardware, which is also lovely, can also fully accept fully vetted software that's fully known, which iOS cannot offer. And my third tweet was, or stated differently, there's no way to remove Apple from the iPhone. That's not okay for the President of the United States. And so to me, an Android phone is absolutely the right solution for that scenario where presumably the NSA or some group that really understands security is providing that operating system soup to nuts in that phone and can absolutely vouch for how it's operating and what it does. So yeah, I'm sure that Brian tweeted this in the wake of our 3 episodes of coverage of iOS security, but it's not to be confused with, while the security in iOS is great, it is utterly Apple-centric. And, they need something way more secure than that.
I'm looking. It is a BlackBerry. I'm looking at, there's a ZDNet photo gallery of all the devices the president
Now, when you
uses.
said Windows 6.5,
well, that was, see, this was what I remembered when he took office, and that's probably one of the problems here.
Well, I absolutely remember when he
had a BlackBerry, and they took it away from him.
Yes.
And the phone they gave him was one that this is a military division of the military that secures communications in the White House, and they have a, Tempest level security smartphone. But of course, it's not a late model because it takes them a while to do all this. And as I remember at the time, it was Windows 6.5. It does look like the one on the black one is a BlackBerry.
I've got some Trios in the fridge that I could send.
The president might want. What we don't know is what's, truth is, I wouldn't let the president use a BlackBerry if he's using BlackBerry servers. No. Because then his communications are going into Canada.
Right.
And I don't care how vaunted the security is. That's not what you want.
I don't think there's any chance that was ever
very much that even if he's using a BlackBerry that he's using anything
going into Canada.
Yeah. Like that. So I don't know. I'm looking at the phone and it's hard to tell. And I think there's the general presumption that he uses a BlackBerry because much of the government does. But I don't know if that's a fair assumption.
Yeah, I do miss mine, but I love all the other toys.
Yeah.
I can't get 2048 for the BlackBerry.
Looks like he uses...
it's hard not to get it for the iPhone or
yeah,
Android.
you need 2048. Oh. Looks like he uses a Nortel phone, though. That's the good news. Or is that Cisco? No, that's Cisco. That's a Cisco phone on his desk there in the Oval Office, it looks to me.
Yeah, you're right, it is. And in fact, there was a photo that went out. Kerry and he and one of his national security advisors, I don't remember whom, were all sitting around. It was during the Putin call, I think. So it was like, oh, look at that, Cisco phones.
Yeah. But again, nothing that they're using is going to be anything like the stuff we use. I would hope. I would really hope.
Is there still there's not still a red phone on the desk, is there? The hotline to the Kremlin. I don't think so.
He probably, they use ham radio.
Yeah.
Question number 3 comes from Paul Cutts, also via Twitter, P. Cutts. He says, if Apple's keychain crypto is no good for iCloud, then surely the whole phone is insecure.
We discussed at the end of Chapter 3 of iOS security last week that the really suspicious thing was that the architect, from what Apple wrote, the architecture seemed to be one that would allow, if this P256 elliptic curve, which it appears Apple uses nowhere but for securing the keychain in the iCloud. Everywhere else they use the good 255.19 elliptic curve that everyone is using and that they use everywhere, that particular use would allow the keychain to be read but not modified. And so we ran out of time, so I wanted to take this opportunity to say, for anyone who is concerned by that, Apple does provide in the iOS settings very granular control over what iCloud is used for. And you can turn off your keychain syncing through iCloud and only the keychain syncing through iCloud, and it'll stop. Presumably, it will wipe what's there, but I would then change my passwords that were synced on the keychain after I turn off iCloud syncing. Again, for those who from hearing what we know, have reason to think that it's worth doing that. So it's certainly possible for everything else to remain secure, yet this one thing that we know about that seems a little suspicious, just, to choose not to use that.
Tweet number 4 comes from David Peterson at dpeters11 regarding Emmet on XP. It does help some. What was Emmet? It was the Microsoft.
That's the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit.
Right.
Yes.
But ASLR, that is address space location randomization, isn't available. Oh, yeah, because XP doesn't support it.
Correct.
Yeah. Chrome itself works, but I couldn't get Flash working.
So there are a couple points here. First of all, he was right. DEP, which is the data execution prevention, DEP was introduced in XP and was not used except by Microsoft's own code. And then there was a setting somewhere you could flip to turn it on for all your apps and then find out what broke as a consequence.
Right.
And you were also able to turn it on or maybe turn it off selectively. Anyway, there were controls for DEP. ASLR, we first talked about in the context of Vista, which was where that was introduced. So David's right. You would be, Emmet won't help you manage ASLR on XP, only DEP, but it will do that. And when he said Chrome itself works, but he couldn't get Flash working, I heard a lot of feedback from people who either had extensive experience already with Emmet or were experimenting with it after we talked about it some more. And it is exactly, I think, the way I characterized it, which is to say it's an expert's tool. It is not something for everyone. I mean, it makes NoScript look like a walk in the park. And, some people feel that even NoScript is asking too much from people to say, oh, look, the site seems broken. Oh, I'll turn scripting on. Oh, now it works. Emmet is like that on steroids. And so it's very powerful, but with that power comes responsibility, which is why it's not built in. It's why it's not there all the time. Microsoft says, most people just don't want this much. But for our listeners, especially those who want to crank things up, if they plan to continue using XP past its end of patch point, I think it's a valuable tool.
Here's a longer one.
I would say plan to spend some time with it.
Yes. And, of course, the people we're worried about with XP are not using Emmet. A paranoid listener somewhere in the beautiful American wilderness poses a question about security certificates. Steve, I was listening to episode 443, Sisyphus. I use a small nonprofit Italian email provider. There you go. Which gives me POP and SMTP over SSL. In order for their service to work, I had to download and install a certificate they provide. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. I've heard of such things. So my question is, why should I trust DigiCert, VeriSign, or the Hong Kong Post Office more than this provider? It seems like a fair bet that if I download the certificate from their webpage where instructions are on what to do with it also reside, it belongs to them. I don't care who they are behind or beyond my email provider, which is verified by the fact that, in fact, my email works with this cert. Is there some insecurity issue I'm missing? Love the show, love your software. Wish every developer employed the painstaking diligence that you do to write such beautiful and efficient code.
Okay, so this is an interesting question because he's saying there's a specific site that he wants to be able to establish SSL connections with. They apparently, for whatever reason, probably cost, choose not to purchase a certificate from a certificate authority that his system already knows and trusts. Instead, they have presumably a self-signed certificate, so they've just signed it, and they've said, here's our certificate.
That's kind of the equivalent of giving you a password and having you log in by a password, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And so he notes that they're making it available on their webpage. I don't know if their webpage is HTTPS. That would be interesting, because if they're really so unwilling to spend money on security, is their site even secure? Of course, that would raise flags, because it would mean that there was more opportunity for shenanigans. But let's assume that their site is HTTPS, but their email system isn't. So they're able to securely deliver to the user a certificate for them, which the user then trusts.
Okay.
On its face, I don't see a big problem with that. The reason, though, that's not the way the world works is it doesn't scale. And that's the beauty of the certificate authority model, where our browsers pre-trust someone, and then those someones, the certificate authorities, verify the identity of people who want to purchase certificates from them. So the beauty of that is it scales. That is to say, with a foundation of trust in this block of certificate authorities, we don't have to download and install individual certificates for every website we visited. Clearly, if we did, HTTPS would have a much harder time happening than it's already had. I mean, it's been available forever, and still it's not predominant, although it's certainly becoming that rapidly as we've been talking about. But the idea is there's more responsibility on the part of the user. There's, as I mentioned, there's the danger of the channel through which you obtain the certificate being insecure. So there's that danger. But fundamentally, if you got certificates from individual places you visited, all other things being equal, you'd have a big pile of certificates. And when you attempted to connect, your browser would verify the identity through that certificate, and you'd connect. So mostly, I think the problem is that it doesn't scale, and again, it's worrisome that you're using sort of the same channel to obtain the certificate that you are then using to trust and so forth. So I would say in this instance, you're probably okay. And the reason it's not done more pervasively, again, is that it would be too big a pain for everyone. It's better to have certificates pre-trusted, although, as we've just been talking about, with that comes its own set of problems.
Pre-trust is like pre-crime. Question 6, an anonymous listener from the Squirrel feedback page. How does Squirrel allow for identity sharing? For example, if a family uses one central Amazon, Netflix, Hulu account for all their media access, how can we share Squirrel tokens? We all want access to the same account, but Squirrel is specifically designed to be unique.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The way this is handled is we have assumed in the design that you might have a centrally used machine that the family shares. You know, it might be the family shared computer. And normally people are individually authenticating with their usernames and passwords as they go places. And probably in a shared environment, they're a little more schooled about not staying logged in and about explicitly logging off when they're done using a site. Otherwise, you know, somebody else comes along and is able to use it. But switching among accounts, you know, login accounts, that will prevent, you know, a single account session from persisting. What Squirrel does, and here's where we wish we
take the garbage.
We had our what Squirrel does is allow you to define as many identities as you want. So, you know, mom and dad and brother and sister can each have their own named identity, and there can be one called family. And so all they have to do at any time that you're about to authenticate, Squirrel pops up a dialog where you verify, and prominent in the center of that is the identity, which is, if there are more than one, which is currently selected, and there's a link right there to change identity. So nobody will know anybody else's password, so you don't have to worry about forgetting to change the identity. But if you were logging into Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, any of these shared ones, and it was set to your identity in your own session, you could just click on the little link in the UI, change it to family, and then you know, use the commonly known family password to say, yes, I'm a member of this family, and then you're logged in. So we've got that covered.
Yay! Number 7 already? Wow. John Clayton via Twitter asks, what we do talk about Threema a lot, which is a secure, public key crypto-based text messaging service. Under what is a Threema ID in their FAQ, they reference submitting a public key to a directory. How does that differ from iMessage?
I thought that was a good question because, of course, I was complaining about iMessage and the fact that Apple manages the public key directory, and therein lies a potential problem. I should mention that I saw some people as I was going through feedback who were saying, hey, Steve, you know, you're complaining that Apple is doing this in the way they are, but you didn't complain about all the other facts that were in evidence from the document, and all they have to do is change any of that if they want to. And that's absolutely true. For me, the distinction is that without changing the architecture of iMessage at all, Apple, and this is the point that I made, could operationally add a public key and receive messages that they're able to decrypt. So I do think that is a distinction with a difference in terms of the technology that exists in the phone, in the firmware, and of course in the hardware. And in here, this is just the function of the service. So to answer John's question, what I like about what Threema is doing is that it is inherently transparent. And that's the problem with iMessage. We don't see the public keys of the people that we're messaging. We don't even see how many public keys there are. So, you know, there could be an additional one and we'd have no idea that that was going on. With Threema, we're responsible for managing the public keys of the people we trust. That's a barrier that Apple removes at the cost of security, which which Threema makes explicit. And I love it that they make it explicit, because that is the sole point of security. Remember that Threema has 3 dots that are either, what are they? 3 reds, maybe a yellow, and then one red, 2 oranges, and 3 greens, I think it is.
Yeah, because 3 is good. More is good.
Yes. And the idea is that the only way you can get 3 green dots is if you present your phones to each other and the phones snap each other's QR code format public key. So there you've had a meeting of the devices, and you absolutely know that the public key you've received belongs to the owner. What the intermediate stage uses a directory where you're assuming that the directory is good. And as I recall, there are hashes that are shown, so you can get the key. And again, they've exposed everything, so you can then say to your friend, "Hey, I think I've got your public key. Is this the hash?" And your friend says, "Yep, that's the thumbprint or fingerprint of my public key." So there you're able to, out of band, verify that you have the public key for the person you believe you do. So that's the difference. There's, it's fundamentally the same technology, but by burying the management of authentication, Apple has made it easy at the cost of some security. Threema absolutely puts it out in the public. And it's why I just think that's, if I absolutely care about having secure messaging, and I don't, because I have no real need for it. But if I did, I would use Threema, and I would arrange out-of-band exchange of public keys.
I have the key management is always an issue with public and private key crypto because, for instance, PGP keys are kept on key servers. MIT runs one, and it's propagated to all the other key servers. And I have made many keys since 1999 when I made my first key. And, you're supposed to, or I guess you should, create a revocation capability so that you can, if you want a new key, revoke the old one. But I didn't do that, so I probably have 10 or 20, I don't know, some unknown number of keys still on those servers.
All still valid, do you think? Do they not expire?
Well, I never see. Okay, bad key hygiene. You should set them to expire, and you should have a revocation password or certificate so that you can pull them back. I never did, and I don't, and I have no idea what the passwords are.
You're like me. I mean, you were into it because it was available and it was cool. You were playing with it, but you weren't really absolutely depending upon.
Because no one uses it.
Right.
I love it. So what I do is I make, every time I forget the password or whatever, I make a new key. So I have a current key. It's about a year old. But I get email all the time on old keys, and all I can do is send them the new key and say, look, this is my current public key. And there's another flaw, which is that anybody can create a key with my email address. Yeah. So I know there are phony keys up there too. They're no good because I don't have the private key for them. So people do that to mess with you. I don't think there's any security issue involved unless somebody starts. I don't know how it would work. I can't think of a scenario where it'd be bad. They'd have to get my email and everything.
Yeah, I heard you talk. I was going to say, I heard you talking on Sunday about fake Twitter followers.
Oh, yeah.
That you think, and so what is that about? Is that like bots create accounts in order to monitor your feed?
No. It's a very tenuous way, but people do it. I would say more than half of all Twitter accounts are spurious. And they're created often by spammers. In fact, I get a ton of spam. They'll create the account, they'll put your name in it and hope that you will follow it. I don't know if they hope you'll retweet it. I don't know what the plan is. They direct message you if you follow them back, so I don't. I mean, it's not the best form of spam, but these guys, they got plenty of time.
Yeah,
they got nothing better to do. So there's certainly inactive accounts. There's probably a lot of those, but a good many of them are spammers, and I see it all the time. I get a ton of Twitter spam. So, but it's nothing to worry about. But it is germane if you want to invest in Twitter.
Right.
Actually, speaking of Twitter, this is a good one.
Yes.
From eStrategy Pro. Of course, Turkey famously has tried to block Twitter, and they did it because they changed. I guess everybody in Turkey uses the same internet service provider, or it's a government-run internet service provider. They modified the DNS so that you can't get to Twitter. So, and you'll see it in graffiti on the sides of buildings, 8.8.8.8, Google's DNS server. So people just fixed it. They said, well, we won't use the government DNS server. We'll use Google. Well, now he says Turkey reportedly intercepted Google's DNS by redirecting 8.8.8.8 to their own DNS. Can direct IP address connections be spoofed?
So, yes.
It kind of takes government level capabilities.
Yeah, it takes anybody who can interpose themselves in the traffic stream. And certainly a governmental body has the ability to impose whatever restrictions they choose to on the data traffic flowing across their border or, into and out of the country. DNS is one of the oldest protocols. It was created back in the beginning, and it really hasn't changed much. We've talked about DNSSEC, DNS security, the idea that DNS records could be signed, cryptographically signed, to prevent spoofing and to allow the recipient to verify them. OpenDNS has the DNS curve system where they essentially establish their own elliptic curve crypto between users of OpenDNS clients and the servers for the same reason, to encrypt and protect the connection. So there are things that have been done since, but 99.99999%. I mean, today DNS is not secure. It was designed by the guys that know what they're doing to be super lightweight. So it uses UDP, which is just a single packet. It doesn't use the whole 3-packet TCP handshake, nor does it then bring up after that an additional secure connection, SSL, TLS. It simply sends in the plane a small little query in a single packet off to the DNS server, assuming that that's where it's going. And a response comes back containing the IP address and some additional information that they asked for. And it works, and it's good enough for everyone to rely on. Because it's not perfect, as I said, there have been efforts to improve its security. And we really do depend upon the security of DNS. Largely, it's secure because normally our DNS queries don't go very far. Most ISPs, for example, host and manage their own big iron DNS servers, and all of their customers' DNS queries go just to the DNS server and back. That minimizes their transit bandwidth. We've talked about the benefits of caching transit in order to minimize cost to the ISP, because these servers cache all of the DNS queries that they look up from elsewhere, and then all of the customers get it from the cache. So it's very efficient. But it is trivial, and this is the key word, trivial, for any entity like the Turkish government to decide, to see what's going on, to see 8.8.8.8 graffiti on the walls, and to instruct the ISP to essentially see a UDP packet coming from there and redirect it to their own DNS server, which blocks whatever they want to, and then respond as if they were 8.8.8 back to the system that asked the question in the first place. So unfortunately, nowhere currently is DNS security required unless you go to extreme measures like with the DNS curve system and a proprietary DNS server organization like OpenDNS. Do I mean OpenDNS? Is it Open?
Yeah, OpenDNS. You mean
yeah. It just seemed like that was more of a project name than a company name.
No, it does, doesn't it? I didn't think of that.
OpenSSL,
but they use,
OpenVPN.
they support. The fact they were one of the first to support DNSSEC, and they do a good job.
Yeah, but
any ISP could do this. In other words,
yes, it's got you need a hierarchy, very much the way we have a certificate hierarchy. But the root is, I think, all of the root servers are now signed, so we have the beginning of a hierarchy. It just, it's like, why is it taken companies so long to go to HTTPS, even though it's been obvious they should for years? It's just inertia, and everyone's busy and has priorities and other things to do. So the bad news is the internet, and this was a point I made earlier that I said I was going to talk about, was never designed as a means of exerting control. It was actually, I'm not sure that it was designed for the reverse. It's been adopted for the reverse as, the great unifier and freer and nobody owns it, all of that. Actually, it's just beautiful, simple technology that is incredibly effective. And it's also very prone to abuse. And so if somebody inside Turkey is having a hard time getting to Twitter because the Turkish government just thinks, they're anti-social media, apparently, and think that social media is the scourge, there's really not much anyone can do because it's, again, the net was not designed to be controllable, but if somebody really wants to exert the control, all the buttons are there, allowing them to do it.
You've seen the, I guess they do this every year, the key signing ceremony for DNS that they do every year. The seven.
Not DNS. It's the
root servers. I thought it was the root servers.
Sorry. Yeah, you're right. The DNS root servers, yes.
Yeah. I mean, they have, it's actually a physical ceremony.
Yes.
There's a physical metal key. Each of the primary 14 key holders owns a traditional metal key to a safety deposit box, which contains a smart card, which activates a machine that creates a new master key.
Yeah.
Love this.
Yeah. It's very cool.
It's very secret society.
I think we have 2 of them in the U.S. They're it's international, but I think I remember that we have 2 key holders in the U.S. I don't remember now what the distribution is.
Yeah. Let me see if I can. One of the key holders is a Russian. There's several several non-governmental organizations.
Right.
Lynn Lipinski, PR for ICANN. Here's a picture. Signs the official register of the key ceremony. This is a great article which was in the Guardian last month. They do retina recognition, and I mean it is a little Deus Opie. I mean it is a little
Yep. And look at those boxes.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I don't know. I'll find the information, and if you want to, the easiest way to do it is DNS key ceremony in the Guardian. It was February 28th. Highly recommended. What a great story it is.
Yeah, it was neat.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Sorry about that. I just remembered that. And a Mamanamas listener asks about crypto libraries on this. Can you be anonymous if you can't pronounce anonymous? About crypto libraries on the Security Now page. Steve, can you mention some cryptographic libraries? You once mentioned that good crypto is available for free. He's not sure if that means free as in beer or free as in freedom. It would be nice to get some pointers. Thanks for your great work, and you've got some notes in here with a number of
I do. And so I just thought I did a little bit of work. I mean, I pulled it out of the air because I have been living and breathing this stuff. Dan Bernstein, who is a famous cryptographer who's got that great domain cr.yp.to, he set about designing a cryptographic library with the goal that it would be difficult to misuse. Many of the cryptographic libraries are easy not to, they're easy to misuse. I'm trying to use a better phrase, but I mean, it's easy not to get the effect that you want, even though you think you are, from the library, because they're complicated and because crypto is complicated and it's easy to make mistakes. So he said, okay, what is it that people really want to do? And let's just facilitate that. So he created a library called, it's pronounced SALT, but it's NaCl is the way you spell.
I love it. What a geek.
So NaCl.cr.yp.to. That's sort of the template for for where everyone has gone. I call it a template because it only compiles to, I think, like Linux or one of the Unixes. It is not written so that it runs on 32 and 64 and Little Endian and Big Endian and everything. What happened was the OpenDNS folks wanted to do their DNS curve. So they started with Bernstein's library and completely rewrote it fabulously. First of all open source and really cross-platform. And this is Umbrella Labs. And so I have a link to the original Dan Bernstein SALT because you can just sort of get a feel for it there. But what you want is Sodium, which is based upon SALT.
I love this.
And free and open source, hosted over on GitHub. It's very portable. It's very portable C with ports to OS X, all of the BSDs, Windows. It's got Ruby and Python bindings. Basically, well, for example, it's what I'm using for the Squirrel client because it's using the right curves. It's using Bernstein's 255.19 curve that everybody is using. Someone noted that there's a Wikipedia page for curve 2519 and Squirrel is now on it. And I noted that I'm in really good company too, because like all of the, like Threema, for example, is there. And a bunch of other companies that are saying, okay, what's the best way to do the strongest crypto today? And it's to use the proper elliptic curve. And Sodium is a beautiful expression of Bernstein's design of a library that is difficult to misuse. Also, it's worth mentioning the Stanford University's JavaScript crypto library, SJCL, which you can just, if you just Google Stanford's JavaScript crypto library, you'll find it. I know that some people think that crypto and JavaScript is inherently oil and water. I would argue there are places for crypto running on the browser, client side. There are fun things you can do. And they've got a beautiful library in JavaScript.
Wasn't that, what was that, Crypt-based or CryptoBase.io that you and I were looking at was a JavaScript implementation of OpenPGP?
Oh, you mean Keybase.io. Keybase.io.
Yeah. And they admit, as we talked about, if you're doing it in the browser, you've got to hope that the browser's not compromised and nobody's injecting anything. But it's just seemed like such a good idea.
Yeah, well, there are many things. I mean, I've the password haystacks, the ultra high entropy pseudo random number generator. I mean, I've done and the off the grid project. That's crypto in the browser, taking advantage of of cryptographic pseudorandom number generation and other stuff. So again, with an understanding of the domain, I think it makes sense. And I just didn't want to forget Peter Gutmann's, or is it Gutmann's? Never really was sure how to pronounce his last name. He's been in crypto forever, and he's got a fabulous crypto library just called CryptLib, which is also free and available and open source, that he's been maintaining for years. It's very mature, although I don't think it offers elliptic curve stuff. So if you want to do public key crypto, the Sodium library that I mentioned from Umbrella Labs is the one, and it's what's embedded in Squirrel.
And all of these are libraries that have glue to all the other languages, right?
Sodium definitely does. JavaScript is JavaScript. But the other ones, pretty much all languages are able to make C calls. So you're able to like invoke a C function through them.
Pouring rain here, by the way. I don't know if you...
Oh, is that what we're hearing?
Yeah.
I was wondering.
Can you hear that? I thought you might be able to. It sounds like white noise, right?
Yeah. Wow. We had a tiny little bit at about 3 a.m. this morning, and then it's going to come back for a second round. Although we've had our share of earthquakes in the last week.
Yeah, I didn't ask you. Did you feel that?
Things fell over.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
No damage, though.
No damage, no.
Moving along to question 10, our second to last, our penultimate question. Robert Lowry in Kansas shares some info about OpenOffice. Steve, I've heard you mention LibreOffice on SN a few times lately, which I've been using for a few years. Then on the last episode, I heard you mention that Oracle had let OpenOffice die, which is why I, too, had switched to LibreOffice. However, I discovered about 8 months ago Oracle had donated OpenOffice to Apache in June 2011. I have been relying upon OpenOffice more and more, and it has rarely let me down when it comes to reading and editing MS Office documents. LibreOffice was a fork of OpenOffice, and for a while that fork was more active. But that happens a lot in open source. By the way, SpinRite has saved multiple drives for friends, family, and customers, so thanks for a great product.
So I just wanted to put that in. We've talked about LibreOffice. Everyone who has tweeted and uses it says it's great, but it sounds to me like if you're looking for an Office alternative, and it's also the case that Office 2003 stops being supported next Tuesday as well, second Tuesday of the month. So if you're looking for an alternative and you find that there's a document that LibreOffice won't open, then you may find that OpenOffice will. So I wanted to mention that it's still around. I did know that Apache had picked it up, so maybe when I meant that they let it die, I meant that it died for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It does run on Java. Does that concern you?
What runs on Java?
OpenOffice and Libre.
Again, if you keep Java out of your browser, you're fine. For example, crowdin.net that we're using for the Squirrel translations, they provide a Java-based command line system. Basically, they have an API to their server, but this allows me to, in my build process, to literally pull the files in real time from Crowdin, so I'm always using the latest versions, which is handy. And so, and in fact, that's why I remember I installed Java a while ago and was mistakenly impressed by the fact that they said, oh, look, we're not enabling this for your browsers. And I thought, yay! But then a listener said, no, that's just because you had it disabled before and it remembered that it was disabled before, that they're not actually doing that. So I have no problem with Java as a very mature, a very nice language. It just never should have been stuck on a browser and allowed to have the rest of the outside world talk to it. So as long as you disable it in browsers, and you can do that with Java itself, restrict it itself, and then Also, don't install the Java plugin in your browsers, but it's great as a desktop engine.
And the chat room is pointing out that LibreOffice, the team has made a concerted effort to get rid of Java, and only a small part of it now uses Java.
That
good. Will probably be eliminated. It's all being replaced, apparently.
Probably rewriting it in C.
C++, yeah.
Nice.
And I don't know what the status of whether OpenOffice has eliminated Java 2 or they're trying to. It just shows you how long it's been since I've used any of these, because I, of course, remember having to download Java to use them. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I have no Java on my machine, and I run LibreOffice very well, says Denright.
You can understand why they did it in the same way that I understand why the crowd info. Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's truly write once. And boy, there's a huge incentive for doing that.
It may also be the case that while you don't have to download Java, that there's a JRE embedded somewhere in the package. Right?
Yes.
It's not that big. Just because you didn't install Java doesn't mean it doesn't use Java.
In fact, when I think it was the Eclipse IDE. I think it was Java. The same way.
Yeah, that's in Java. Yeah. Aldo in London, UK, has our last question. He's worried about full disk encryption. I have a question about, well, interestingly enough, full disk encryption. I'd like to enable disk encryption on my machine. It's a MacBook Pro, but I'm hesitant for two reasons. Firstly, because of the hit to system performance due to increased processing. Second, because it may shorten the lifespan of my hard drive. I'm using an SSD due to the increased number of operations on the data. Could you comment on the effects of disk encryption on system performance and SSD lifespan, as well as whether the pros outweigh the cons?
I would say do not hesitate. None of those concerns are significant enough to offset the balance of security, even if you're not that needful of security. First of all, although I never understood why, my benchmarks of TrueCrypt showed, and I don't know if you're talking about, Mac full disk encryption or TrueCrypt, but when I benchmarked it, it was faster running under TrueCrypt.
Why would that be?
It was. I remember when I talked about that, it's like, I don't know, a coincidence. I mean, I did it multiple times because I didn't believe my results. I took it off, put it on, took it off, put it on, tried all kinds of different tests. Might have been just a coincidence of like the rotational latency and the, interacting with the overhead. The point is that if there is any overhead, it is now in this day and age, absolutely insignificant.
It is.
For one thing, Intel has added AES-specific instructions to the chip, which have been there now for quite a while, so that if you use AES encryption, I mean, it flies like greased lightning through the Intel. Probably the encryption overhead is insignificant compared to the time you wait for the disk to spin around to get to the sector, so that you absolutely don't feel a difference at all. And so I would say do some measurements of things, time things, do stuff before you encrypt and then encrypt. And I think you'll find you can't tell the difference. And as for an SSD, there actually is, again, absolutely minimal effect. In the case of TrueCrypt, which encrypts the entire drive, it makes one read and write pass through the drive. So that's not anything that an SSD is going to mind. In fact, to the degree that it's a little bit like SpinWrite, it's probably a little good for the SSD to read all of its sectors and then have them written. What TrueCrypt does is it doesn't care what's in the sector. It reads it, it encrypts it, and it puts it back. So it's essentially putting random noise into the sector, but it only writes each sector once, which any SSD can, is going to be tolerating tens of thousands of writes. So again, don't hesitate. I would say employ full disk encryption.
Yeah. I use File Vault on the Macintosh, and I haven't noticed on modern Macs anyway a speed hit. It does take a while to encrypt the first time if you haven't encrypted it before.
Well, because look at the size of our drive.
It's a lot of data. And I particularly use it on SSDs because, as we know, it's not always possible to entirely scramble or erase an SSD.
Yes,
some data leakage may happen, and so on smartphones, I always turn it on. And again, it takes a while to implement it, but once it's implemented, I don't notice any difference on any device.
Yep.
I think nowadays stuff is pretty fast. Wow. Speaking of fast, we've come to the end of this edition of Security Now. Thank you, Steve. Do we know what next week holds?
We don't. I've got a few things on my list. There is Quick, Q-U-I-C. I mentioned a while ago, I actually talked about it earlier in this podcast, is one of the Google initiatives to see about coming up with alternative protocols, which are, as the name implies, if it's not speedy, then it's quick. And really interesting things that they did. So we may have ourselves a propeller head episode. Everyone, I know people really enjoy the deep technical stuff when we plow into that. And so if nothing comes up that preempts it, we may talk about that, because I did the research months ago and then we just got too busy with emergencies. And I want to get back to it, because I remember thinking, oh gosh, Google. I mean, and I even talked about it before. I remember now saying that one of the neatest things about Google is they really are working to improve the internet. I mean, it may in some sense be self-serving because, yes, their browser gets the benefit of these things, and they're inherently an internet-based solution. So things like transaction time and turnaround time and latency really matter. It is frightening when you look at the studies that show how quickly users will give up on a page which is slow to load. It's like amazing how quickly they'll say, forget this, and hit back and then choose the next link. So anything we can do to reduce the latency is a good thing. And Quick is they just pulled out all the stops. It's very clever.
Steve Gibson is at grc.com. That's where you'll find 16 kilobit versions of this little bit of a show. That makes it even a littler bit of a show, as well as text transcriptions written by an actual human being. grc.com. You'll also find SpinRite there. What's the current version of SpinRite?
6.0.
All right.
We are shipping, and of course, our audience all knows that as soon as I get Squirrel launched, I'll be going back and resuming the work on 6.1. And my commitment to everyone is, just because I think I should, everyone who ever bought 6.0 gets 6.1 for free. We are thinking, though, that we're going to, at that time, kill off all upgrades from previous versions, because it will have been 10 years that anybody who had any prior version in this last decade could have upgraded to 6.0. So I think, it just makes things easier for us not to be, have 4 people a year do something that, complicates everything. So I think when 6.1 occurs, everyone who has 6.0 will be able to upgrade for free. I know that. That will give, awareness of the newer partition table format, the so-called GUID or EFS format, the GPT, the GUID partition table, native operation on a Mac, because we'll no longer get fooled by the keyboard, which is USB on the Mac. I had that working some time ago, and direct access to the hardware, so huge performance improvement. And frankly, I'm hoping that it continues to recover data as well as the current one does. Not that I don't think it will, but the current one just performs miracles. And sometimes I'm scratching my head thinking, wow, how does it do that? Which, of course, all of our users are also thinking.
Well, we'll look for that with a great interest. And, of course, as always, it's free, as all upgrades are, to SpinRite, because he's a generous fella, that Steve. Future question editions can be addressed by going to grc.com/feedback and leaving your thought or question, or apparently tweeting Mr. Gibson at SGGRC.
I do keep an eye on my feed.
He follows his Twitter feed with great interest.
Well, it's a great way. You know, throughout the week, people are saying, hey, I just saw this, I just saw that. And, you know, these episodes have been built from that largely. And I think it's really improved their quality.
Yeah. We also have...
Certainly it's extended their length.
we also have versions of the show, audio and video, available at our site, twit.tv/SN. And the best thing, of course, would be to subscribe, and that way you get it each and every week right after we do it. We do it on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 2000 UTC, live on twit.tv. And we like it if you watch live, too. I interact with the chat room a little bit, have a little chat.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. We'll see you next time on Security Now.
Thanks, Leo.
Security.